This morning we want to begin a different series based on some of the early parts of Isaiah and the corresponding parts of the history found in 2 Chronicles. The question: did God die? Is God dead? This is Time magazine, April 8th, 1966. It's the most famous front cover in the history of Time magazine. It's the only time that Time magazine featured a front without a photograph or a drawing, simply text. It sold more copies in the newsstand than any history ever had before or since. They received the largest number of letters in response to this issue that they ever had to date, over 3,500. Historians and sociologists point to this issue and call it a signpost of the times. It is a signpost of the age that was unfolding. The author of this series of these articles that are found in this issue of Time magazine, John T. Elson, spent over a year researching. Elson was a reporter's reporter. He was the son of a reporter. He died September 17th, just last month, at the age of 78. This remained the single most read report that John T. Elson ever produced. The statement was not that God as a living being was living and had died. You have to understand what they were saying. Rather, a group of liberal theologians in the period had been meeting and arguing and had become known as the God is dead theologians, and launched what was known as the God is dead movement. Their arguments evolved not around the fact that God had lived and God lived no more, but around this argument: that God never did exist, there never has been a God, and we had evolved to a point as a people, as human beings, that we no longer needed to believe in God. It was no longer necessary. These theologians, who then each went on to publish different works that were significant in their fields, promoted an idea that was a godless theology. In Greek, the Greek language speaks of ethos, which is ethics or morality, and theos, which is God. And has always been the assumption that ethos, morality, flowed from theos, God. But these theologians were saying that God was not necessary for the equation. You could have ethos without theos. You could have morality without God. God was no longer necessary. Now, why would educated men reach what seems to us such a crazy conclusion? Well, it is the logical outcome of a philosophy known as naturalism. Because naturalism's grand theory is evolution. And the current evangelist for atheism, an evolutionist named Richard Dawkins from England, says that evolutionary theory is mankind's greatest work. Let me quote Richard Dawkins from an article in Time, in the New York Times, just earlier this year. Evolution is the creator of life, and life is arguably the most surprising and most beautiful production the laws of physics have ever generated. Evolution is the greatest show on earth and the only game in town. Where does that leave God? the kindest thing to say, according to Dawkins, it leaves him with nothing to do and no achievements that might attract our praise or be worthy of our worship. Did God die? Have we reached a point in the evolution of humanity that it's no longer necessary for us to postulate there is a God, theos, in order for us to have ethos, in order for us to have morality? My answer, not hardly. But godliness has fallen out of favor. As a matter of fact, it has fallen out of favor among Christians. Because we now pursue the typical disciplines of Christianity as if they are simply optional. You want evidence of that? Look around. And the evidence is all around us. I've entitled this new study, The 5 Kings of Isaiah. For in the 40-year ministry of Isaiah, the 40 years that Isaiah lived and ministered, which is covered by the first 36 chapters of Isaiah, there were 4 kings that Isaiah related to. The first one was Uzziah, followed by his son Jotham, followed by his son Ahaz, and followed by his son Hezekiah. You say, that's 4 kings. Where's the 5th king? The 5th king is the king Isaiah prophesied about. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, our Lord Jesus Christ. When you study this period of history and then begin looking at the words of Isaiah, which are some of the most beautiful words found in the Bible, Isaiah is the pinnacle of what's known as classical prophecy in the Old Testament. He is the top. He is the most articulate. He is the one that expressed from a literary perspective in the most beautiful form these prophetic oracles. And from a theological perspective, he's the one that expressed with the greatest depth of any of the prophets an understanding of what God was doing and what God was about. The first 36 chapters deal with this period in his life. The rest of the book are prophetic words that deal with the period hundreds of years after Isaiah's life, when he looked forward and God gave him glimpses of what was to come for his nation, Judah. I find in studying this period of history and the words of Isaiah striking parallels to our own day and our own time. Isaiah chapter 6 tells